I've worked in an environment where there was this worm called Comthicker, so a computer worm, and it did absolutely nothing to the OT environment, but it was pervasive. It just went everywhere. If you plugged in a USB stick and you took it to another computer without anti-malware, it would get infected. If it was on the network without anti-malware, it would get infected. But because it was more of an IT thing and not an OT-specific malware, it was benign.
Welcome back to another episode of Unplugged, an IIoT podcast. Today, we've got an incredible conversation lined up for you, full of insights that you're not going to want to miss. But before we dive into that, I want to take a quick moment to thank our main sponsor today, Smithtek. Smithtek specializes in turnkey hardware and software solutions, making remote monitoring and control a breeze. Whether it's agriculture, mining, industrial automation, or even environmental monitoring, Smithtek has you covered. Built right in Perth, Western Australia, their products are reliable, scalable, and adaptable to your needs, whether you're managing pumps, irrigation systems, or generators from afar. Plus, with their web-based SCADA system and support for a wide range of industrial protocols, integrating your systems is seamless. Their user-friendly interface gives you real-time control anytime, anywhere. If you're looking for a smarter way to manage your assets, Smithtek makes it easy and efficient. With that said, let's dive into today's conversation.
Welcome to Unplugged, an IoT podcast where we delve into the fascinating world of industrial Internet of Things and automation. I'm your host, Phil Saboa.
Hi, Phil, and I'm Ed Fuentes. Well, Phil, interesting day today. I think we've got you and I, we've been playing in this space for quite a while, and one area that we sort of skim around, don't we, around this cybersecurity area. So today we're very fortunate to have Gavin Dilworth, who is the director of ICS OT Cybersecurity at Assessment Plus, and he's an expert in cybersecurity, industrial control systems. I know it's a hard one. Well, according to us, Gavin, you're expert. And the good thing about this, Phil, is he's come from that automation background, hasn't he?
He absolutely has. And Gavin's journey into cybersecurity began with a strong foundation in industrial automation. You know, his career evolved into a focus in protecting critical infrastructure from growing threat of cyber attacks. I mean, that's something that's really on the kind of, you know, on every newsstand all the time, that people are getting attacked, and we need people like you to help defend that. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. And yes, I guess I am fortunate having come from the industrial automation space. So originally I was actually an operator, and I was studying IT. And I had a hobby in the IT field that I was studying cybersecurity. Fortunately, the maintenance manager tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You good with computers?" And I said, "Sure." And he's like, "Let me take you to the industrial automation department." And that's how I got into PLC, SCADA, and programming that space. But a few years later, almost a decade, I suppose, it sort of caught up with me. I was in the UK, and everybody was worried about these emerging threats, as you say, and so I sort of jumped onto the cybersecurity thing because I was sort of already was dabbling in it, if you will. And I've been very lucky to have such a career.
So I guess you've been in New Zealand now for a fair chunk of time and developing that kind of, industry knowledge. And I guess what have you found the difference is, globally in that space?
Oh, it's the Americans are doing like a lot better than other people. I think they started a lot sooner, whereas like UK, Australia, New Zealand, we're all playing catch up. I feel from that regard, but we're still doing a lot of good stuff. Australia's got the SOCI Act, which is critical infrastructure, basically risk management for that. New Zealand's still getting its legislation in place, if you will. And, the UK was subject to the NIST directive, and then it exited the European Union. So it's sort of doing its own thing at the moment. Very, very new and emerging space. So one of the interesting things, or you could say frustrating things, is that because it's so new, nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing. When you're talking about this, people are like, okay, what does that look like? Like, what do I do? And they can trip themselves up, if you will, because they just get bombarded with all this information, and then they sort of freak out. And so yeah, it's definitely entertaining to see everybody sort of go through the process of what is OT cybersecurity, how do I secure my PLCs, my SCADA systems, and smart meters like AMI, advanced metering infrastructure, your energy meters on the house. Like everybody's been going through this process of understanding their risks and how to deal with it, and it's been quite a journey. So most of the time I get asked, well, what is it do you do and what does it look like? And it's not an easy thing to describe, but most people are surprised with what they actually get as an end result. I don't know if I actually answered your question. So.
No, it's interesting because if we go, maybe you mentioned OT, because in the OT area, traditionally we air gap that from everything. We try to lock it down. It is how we run our manufacturing. But in the move of IIoT and Industry 4 and digital transformation, where data from every part of the business is important to get to or access to. So we're seeing this move to IIoT and cybersecurity, all these challenges are coming up. And I think that's the space you're playing, Gavin. It's that area of how do we move from this environment where we were air gapped in the past, and now we want to get people to access data. So how do you see it? What are the challenges people face when they think about securing these infrastructures?
Yeah, generally, you sort of nailed it with the business requirements of we need to be connected now. We need that data relatively quickly to make better decisions. Not to mention, like, if we want to throw buzzwords around like AI and digital twins and, all that sort of stuff, that the businesses now or enterprises now need that data. So we can't really air gap it anymore. And as you say, more and more people are connecting up. So that's one of the challenges is how do I do that securely? Now, what most people do in the OT cybersecurity space is first they look at the Purdue model, which you may or may not be familiar with. Originally came from Purdue University, then was in ISA 95, then became part of ISA 99, which is now known as IEC 62443. And there's actually quite a bit of difference in the Purdue models when you go through those stages. So they look similar, but 62443 actually has slightly different placements. And so does it really matter? You're sort of like, well, not really, because all of them across the board are based on function. And a lot of people struggle with that word. It's like, well, what does that mean? In an ISA 95 sort of scenario, a PLC is a controller, therefore it's definitely level 1. When you get to IEC 62443, that's still true. Its function is control, so it's still a level 1 device. But the reason we go through this process of defining assets where they are on the Purdue level is so that we can draw a box around them, throw some risk scenarios at it, and then go, okay, the best way to connect it up is with these controls or barriers in place to prevent a cyber attack. And so, as you say, like most people, they immediately go for an OT IDMZ or an internal DMZ or industrial DMZ, whatever you'd like to call it. And that just becomes a connection point. So that way, not everything's talking to everything. Only a small fraction of devices are actually talking up into the enterprise. And so it's a way of aggregating, if you will, and making a secure area that people interface into. So that's where people start, usually.
So they're having these, I guess, aggregation levels. They're trying to reduce the amount of open ports in between different layers. I guess, is that the kind of premises between, I guess, to give our audience that aren't really, I guess, au fait with the terminology of the Purdue module. It's, a strategic hierarchy, I guess, between different layers and different functional areas of the business. And then how does that, I guess, what does that evolution look like as it went through the stages?
Well, the stages of sort of adding a device, or the stages of the Purdue model was evolving?
Well, the Purdue model evolving into the ISA 99 structure and so forth. So what are the, I guess, the commonalities between them, and then what are the differences?
Well, the main thing people need to focus on is that function thing. You're looking at the function to place it on the map. There are things that are very, very similar, and that's half of the problem, because people, they see it and they think they recognize it straight away. The reason it's a problem is because from a cybersecurity point of view, you've been trained in one particular way. Like, I'm fortunate enough that I've seen the multiple versions, and the differences are extremely subtle. So realistically, trying to find the differences isn't really going to help you. What you need to understand is, what are the cybersecurity guys trying to do when you look at these models to secure devices? What it is what is the function of the device? That determines placement. Okay, so now that it's placed somewhere on the levels, it doesn't matter where, but somewhere, we're then trying to find commonality in terms of how it interfaces and what it connects to. So like an HMI and a PLC, and some pumps and temperature and flow sensors, that could be in one zone, if you will. And we like to group assets in zone so that they share similar risks. Okay, so once you have that collection of assets, then you can actually start throwing the risk scenarios, the threat scenarios at them to see where they need to be placed. Because one main concern people have is, I have to secure everything. And it's like, well, that's not really the case. There are more important assets than others. So instead of trying to secure all the things, let's do these risk scenarios, risk assessments, to find out which ones are the ones that matter and apply the appropriate sort of controls for that, security controls that is, or countermeasures. With that process, you can then start collecting more assets and grouping those into zones and subzones, and then doing the process again and again. And then you get a holistic view of the entire control system environment, if you will. And then now you know what's important, what's not, and you can go through the process of then securing it. So realistically, the Purdue model, from a cybersecurity person's point of view, is he's trying to grab a bunch of assets, collect them all, put them in the same group that makes sense. So if you've got like an inlet PLC and an inlet HMI, and an outlet PLC and an outlet HMI, they probably don't need to talk to each other. Maybe the PLCs do for, like process communication, but that can go through a firewall, or you could hardwire the I/O interfaces. There's things you can do, but generally you're trying to find what assets share the commonality and purpose, and what risks do they share. And so once you have that, it becomes easier. So that's the trick, really. The cybersecurity guys trying to group the assets to understand the risks. Whereas I think for most other people, when they're looking at the Purdue model, they're just trying to see how they connect stuff together and get that data up to the cloud, if you will, or ERP. So two people using it two different ways is my experience, and that's where there can be confusion.
Is that how you sort of define or help those companies who are just now taking this seriously? They're saying, we're going to be careful. Is that how you do it? Would you follow the Purdue or pick a standard to follow and then do it little by little, like you mentioned, find the assets that function together and protect them? What would the step look like for them?
Yeah, basically, I like to follow IEC 62443, but it's not a hard and fast rule. It's like if you were starting out and you knew nothing about the standards, you would still follow a similar process. So it doesn't matter if you go and learn it or not. The process really is, you find the systems under consideration, those are your assets. You want to then group those assets, place them on the Purdue model, and then throw risk workshops at them where, like I said, those scenarios. And then from that, you can actually get a good holistic view of your enterprise risk from a cybersecurity perspective, specifically OT. If you don't do that, what happens is most organizations, they don't know how to do the budgeting. They don't know where to prioritize. They really do struggle in terms of, we need to do everything or just the basics. So that really helps give them a guide of where they need to spend the resources. And also usually as part of like something, the reports I produce is generally like a roadmap that helps them identify what they need to do next. Unfortunately, what happens with most customers, again, because this is their first time doing this, is that they see the proposal for doing a full risk workshop, And they're like, no, not paying that. Can you do something cheaper? And so you end up doing what we call a gap analysis, where we can, if we've got enough budget, we'll still do the Purdue model. Otherwise, we'll move forward with just finding some vulnerabilities and finding some risks, and then presenting it to them to say, hey, you should probably fix these things. And probably one of the biggest risks, two to three biggest risks that I find is lack of OT resources. So it's not just they don't understand cybersecurity, it's that there's not enough like SCADA engineers available in the enterprise to actually look after their equipment. So that's a risk, right? Because if you can't look after the equipment, it degrades. If it degrades, it stops working. And then the other one is obsolescence. So we all know these things can last 30, 35 years, but if the last guy that programmed it, retired 10 years ago, and nobody else knows how to log into it, you've got yourself a bit of a problem. Do you even have a spare for that PLC? So, yeah.
What are those top? I guess, what are we looking for when we're doing these kind of gaps in analysis? What are the kind of key areas that we're looking for?
Low-hanging fruit, I'd call it. It's that DMZ is a great start. Anyone can build a DMZ and have everything interface through it. It's very, very easy to do, very simple. Doesn't always require a plant outage as well, which is, or a turnaround, which is a massive benefit. From there, you need training. Training is also a really big one to do, because half the time organizations don't even know why they're doing this OT cybersecurity. They see the threats in the newspaper, but they can't rationalize how that would affect them. It's like, oh, a bank got hit. Well, we're not a bank. We're like a water company. So there's this disconnect there. Another one that I see a lot of is just plain old-fashioned user access control. So it's the same username and password everywhere. And, like back in the day, it was always leave it default so everybody knows how to log into it. But of course, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's a terrible idea. Once somebody gets in, they can spread and go everywhere. So, yeah, it's normally that network segmentation through an IDMZ, training, and user access. So getting the basics right really does help. But probably the most important one is, realistically, if you got hit, what do you do? Like, there was a cyber attack at your facility. What do you do now? And most people don't have a plan. And that's sort of where it all goes down. You should really have a plan first. Do we have backups? Can we restore them? Where do we go to get that? And who do we phone when we need help? Because you probably will. And so if you have that, if that's the first thing you do, you actually, doesn't feel like you've reduced your risk or done anything, but you actually have done quite a bit, to be honest. The break glass in case of emergency.
There seems to be a lot to manage here, Gavin. When you mentioned these things, you mentioned some of the good points to follow on: training, network segmentation, using DMZ, plans, structures. You talked about IEC 62443. Is that right? That's something that you're an expert in.
Yep.
Do these standards that you follow, is there enough information or enough methodology in them? Because I imagine, like any standard, they're not shorter than 10 pages, and they're all parts to them. So in that process, for people to grab hold of following 62443, obviously engaging with a consultant is very beneficial, but what can they look at using? Are there forms? Are there strategies? Are there anything that makes it easy for them? I'm being selfish here because I'd love to know what they are. Around that. So, yes, you're right. What you mentioned. Is there something they could follow? Is there some more help?
Yeah, it's interesting when people say they want to do 6243 and you show them the whole standard in all its glory. They're like, no, let's not do that. It could be a bit scary. There's a lot of words, a lot of documents. Some documents are like 300 pages. So yes, it can definitely be a daunting task. So what most people do is they look at 3-2 and 3-3, which is the risk portion of it. So that's the only bit that's focusing on risk, and then applying the security controls and countermeasures from that risk assessment process. So there are other things like a cybersecurity management system, which is really good. That's like governance and policies, procedures. But realistically, when people say, what do I want? What do I want to do? It's that risk-based approach. Now, there is another one called NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. I think I got that right. And it's an American standard or framework, and commonly referred to as the NIST CSF, Cybersecurity Framework, and that's free. So there's a special one there for OT, Special Publication 82, and that is quite good if you're a beginner to understand what are you supposed to do. And if you grab Special Publication 82 and NIST Risk Management Framework, you can get the same thing as the 62443 process, but it's free. But what as you can imagine, which you might suffer from, is you get all these documentations, and again, they're not even the framework standard. They're all like very, very large documents, and the bulk of it really is just identify your assets, group them, throw risk scenarios at them, see what sticks and what doesn't. You may have to shuffle groups around at that stage to get the right risk profile. And then that's the process to follow, really, from a cradle to grave. First step.
So who are you kind of talking to when you're going into these enterprise management systems? Is it OT people? Is it IT people? Managerial staff? Bit of everyone? Like who are you talking to? Yeah.
The whole. You've got your IT people. You've got cybersecurity people. You've got project managers, operation managers, supervisors. Your control system engineers or industrial automation engineers. It's everybody across the board, really, to engage with and get and ask questions. One of the ones that comes up that frequently surprises them is, I don't know if you guys know much about functional safety, safety instrumented systems. Yep. So one of the standards there, I always get this wrong, IEC 61511. No. The process safety standard. There's a requirement in there for you to actually do a cybersecurity risk assessment as part of the functional safety. And what you'll find is, because process engineers and functional safety engineers aren't cybersecurity experts, that they don't know what they're supposed to do. And so when I come along, I read their HAZOPs and I read their LOPAs, layers of protection analysis. I can actually find things where I know they've missed stuff from a cyber sense. And they find it very, very bizarre to be questioned from a cyber perspective on functional safety. So they're like, well, no, we weren't expecting that. We weren't expecting to come in and audit our HAZOPs and our LOPAs and our hazard analysis and bow ties, if you will. So that's another one where I find that you generally find like the nuggets of gold there, where they've connected up a safety instrumented system, and it's like, okay, cool, it's going to protect you safe. You've done all the things right from a safety perspective. But what happens if someone edits the code and then changes the process? And then they're like, oh, yeah, we never factored that in. It's like, yep. So, yeah, those are usually almost always findings in a report.
I guess what do you, when you go to these sites and you do kind of audits, have you seen some, I guess, horror stories, or have you seen some kind of interesting ones that you kind of always see, or you see that as a kind of almost acceptable standard out there? What are you seeing out there?
The horror story is that they're usually all horror stories, unfortunately, and it's completely understandable. Cyber is not something that has been part of design for an OT environment or even IIoT for quite some time. Like it's a very new thing. So yeah, you find vendors have hooked up 3G modems and nobody knew about them, and people just picking up random USB sticks and just plugging them in. There's all kinds of shenanigans taking place. But I think the biggest thing I found is I'm generally surprised when I actually find good practice. That's the I guess the funny part about the job. But you almost go in there knowing that you're going to find stuff, and it really is just showing them, hey, we can uplift you, and we can do it relatively quickly. It's OT cybersecurity is fundamentally very, very slow continuous improvement. That's really all you're doing. You're just throwing the cyber lens at it for that continuous improvement part. But it's slow and continuous. That's all. There's very, very seldom is there big step changes in terms of risk reduction.
Now, I was going to ask you, how do you sometimes, with OT cybersecurity and Phil, probably the same, we've had those conversations where people go, oh, I've never been attacked before. No one's come into our site. How do you answer those questions with people who go, well, we don't have these policies in place, or we're safe, we're whatever it is. How do you, or what do you do there?
Well, it's almost always comes up, and they're like, no, we're never going to get hits, and it's that wishful thinking, she'll be right attitude. You can link them to all the sort of OT attacks. You can speak about how nobody expects you to be a target until you actually are. In the medical field, if you're a patient, doctors apparently have said that patients don't really care about statistics. So when you tell them that their cancer is 1 in 500 million or whatever, as a person that got hit by the cancer, you don't care. You're like, I'm still affected by this. But everyone believes that they're never going to get that cancer. So it's a bit of a dark analogy, but realistically, people are very optimistic that they're not going to be affected by a cyber attack, and who would target them anyway? Why would they do it? And they're all very valid questions, but the reality is that nation states and criminal organisations have been attacking infrastructure and continue to do so. The threats have only trended upwards aggressively. And the saying in the cybersecurity industry is if, not when. I think I got that round the wrong way.
When, not if.
It's when, not if.
I want to take a quick moment to thank our main sponsor today, Smithtek. Smithtek specializes in turnkey hardware and software solutions, making remote monitoring and control a breeze. Whether it's agriculture, mining, industrial automation, or even environmental monitoring, Smithtek has you covered. Built right in Perth, Western Australia, their products are reliable, scalable, and adaptable to your needs, whether you're managing pumps, irrigation systems, or generators from afar. Plus, with their web-based SCADA system and support for a wide range of industrial protocols, integrating your systems is seamless. Their user-friendly interface gives you real-time control anytime, anywhere. If you're looking for a smarter way to manage your assets, Smithtek makes it easy and efficient.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing, right? Is that, we talk to, end users in manufacturing, in industrial applications, and they're always trying to avoid downtime, right? Downtime is kind of like the first thing off the rung. And a cybersecurity attack or, a hack or something could take out your whole plant for, weeks, which is, pure downtime at the end of the day. You're really going to struggle if that happens. And I've actually been part of, a few companies that have had, their ransomware attacks as well, and that has been quite devastating to the businesses that I've been in touch with, and they didn't really prepare for that. They hadn't prepared for that type of. I guess so. How can companies? What kind of attacks can happen, and how can they prepare against those?
Well, there's the most common one you'll see or people talk about, or at least what the executives are afraid of, is a ransomware attack. So generally, most people, whereas OT or IIoT, you want to make sure you've got backup of your configuration, so your PLC code, your instrument code, or configuration settings, your network switch configuration settings, your Windows environment backups. All those things need to be stored. And normally you have the rule of 3, where you have one nearby, like a backup nearby that's live. And then you have a copy of that backup. And then you also then have an off-site backup. So stored in a vault somewhere completely physically isolated. physically different to the site that you're actually on. And that just means that if anything happened to that site, you could always go grab those copies and bring it back. So for ransomware, that's generally, if you get hit with one of those, you're going to be restoring from your backups. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, well, my PLCs and my HMIs will still work. It's like, yeah, you will be running at a degraded capacity. Some HMIs use normal Windows operating systems. Sometimes you've got something like a Panel View Plus or the like, which is an embedded operating system, which may not be susceptible to that ransomware attack. But the moral of the story is you're either running at a degraded state and you might not be able to keep up production for long, or you get a complete loss of view. PLC is going to control, but you don't know what's going on. So realistically, there becomes a point in time where you're going to have to hit that giant big red e-stop, and she's all over. So that's really it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got like different layers of ransomware attacks, right? It might hit your IT layer there, and it hits your ERP or your MES or your database infrastructure, your file systems, your operating procedures, your order books at the end of the day. And if you don't have access to that, you've got a lot of people sitting around waiting for these computer systems to be back up and running, right? And you're paying them at the end of the day as well to just kind of sit there. And that's one of the huge risks for companies, where they're sitting idle waiting for IT professionals to come in and probably save the day, or pay the ransom, which is sometimes not even 100% that you're going to get your data back either. So having that resiliency and that redundancy in baked as part of that strategic tactic, because you're right, it's not about when, it's not about if, it's about when.
Yeah, I mean, you practically described like the Colonial Pipeline attack. I'm not sure if you're aware of that one, but the OT systems were fine. But because the ERP and the MES was, well, they didn't have an MES, but, the scheduling and the billing component was down, they were unable to use it effectively. So they had to shut it until those systems came back up. If they couldn't bill customers, they couldn't use the pipeline. So, sometimes an attack can actually affect the OT system, even though it hasn't been hit. I've worked in an environment where there was this worm called Comthicker, so a computer worm. And it did absolutely nothing to the OT environment, but it was pervasive. It just went everywhere. If you plugged in a USB stick and you took it to another computer without anti-malware, it would get infected. If it was on the network without anti-malware, it would get infected. But because it was more of an IT thing and not an OT-specific malware, it was benign. So it didn't actually impact the OT stuff. So you can get those weird cases. Unfortunately, though, there is an uptick in ICS OT-specific malware, where the actual sort of C2 channel, which is command and control. So if you can imagine bad hackers up in the internet somewhere, they need a channel, if you were, a channel, tunnel, a communication mechanism to send commands to and from whatever there is they're attacking. So they're referred to as C2. Where the C2 was actually written in industrial protocols. So, they're literally hiding in like OPC UA and servers and piping information that way up. So it's getting more and more sophisticated, and they're now starting the APTs, the Advanced Persistent Threats. They're like the nation states. Their skill set is definitely increasing in this area. So you're seeing more and more tailored specific attacks for our space, unfortunately.
In your journey, Gavin, you're doing a lot of training. You mentioned before training was one of those key parts of best practice, I suppose, to stay ahead of it. What are the habits that you've seen changed, that have been changing with businesses, and what habits should be changing?
Oh, that's an easy one. The attitude has basically been what's changed. There's typically been a lot of conflict between OT and IT. It's can get quite heated. Now that OT is getting more and more, there's more awareness out there for it. The IT people have started to realize that, yes, okay, I can't just come in and do IT cybersecurity controls. They're just not effective in this space. So they're willing to take a step back and actually be open and have conversation with engineers. So that's really been good. The downside is, as I've said before, people still don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So the expectations just aren't there in terms of when you engage someone like myself, they don't know what that process looks like. They don't understand what they're going to get or how they're going to remediate afterwards. And a few hours of Googling and you'll get a good idea of what you're actually meant to be doing and expect. There's a lot of free resources out there now, which is quite good.
Excellent.
Yeah, I guess OT engineers. We're talking. What's the key drivers when they're trying to, I guess, start these communications with their IT managers? What do they generally ask for? Are they asking for, support in access? What are they kind of, how can they leverage also, IoT protocols out in there in the field? What's the best practices around that?
Well, if it doesn't matter whether it's a PLC, SCADA, or IIoT, a smart sensor, generally it's just about having that dialogue because the IT department's got skills OT probably doesn't have, and it's about leveraging and learning off of each other. So, learning how network protocols and redundancy and getting things connected up so they stay operationally online, that resiliency you're talking about before. Like some OT engineers have that ability, a lot don't. So realistically, it's open dialogue and trying to be patient and understand each other's point of view is really like the key there. But OT engineers typically, with the connectivity up, what I've seen in the past is if IT put up too much resistance and even cite cybersecurity concerns, if IT don't allow OT engineers what they need, OT will go around IT. Half the time they know that the tradie telecommunications engineer to just put in like another ADSL line just down the back there that nobody knows about so they can get the remote access they want. So from a cybersecurity perspective, that's terrible. But if that's the culture you're dealing with, it can be really frustrating. So I think, most of the time it's really getting that, so try and get that open dialogue, as I've said. But yeah, as for what they're asking for, it's generally remote access. It's generally more data and the ability to actually configure things and allowed to do their job. Generally, I think most OT engineers are like, okay, what am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? Great, cool. If those are the rules of engagement, just tell me that's that, and I'll go do my job. What they don't want is somebody constantly hindering their performance, hindering their ability to actually do their day-to-day. And that just leads to frustration, really.
I think that's where you mentioned that conflict comes into it, right? Is usually their hands are tied by IT. And I think the kind of evolution of the conversation is coming, and we talk about this, the bridge between the two worlds coming across, and I think it's becoming more conversational. Is like, IT, how can we enable these OT engineers to do their job more effectively with proper best practices in mind when we start, giving them access to this data, creating conversations around that stuff. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting how that develops as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I see happening more and more is that understanding is getting there, like slowly, but a lot of concepts I talk to people in my field is that use cybersecurity as an enabler, not like a barrier. And so that's happening more and more. So when someone's like, I want to do this, this, and this, and it's like, oh God, that sounds so insecure. What are we going to do here? What we'd like to switch that mindset into, what are you trying to achieve, and how can I help enable you to get what you want, but we do it securely. And at the end of the day, as I said before, we mentioned it a few times, risk, right? Cybersecurity is risk. Businesses are allowed to accept risk You can highlight the cybersecurity risk and say, no, you shouldn't be doing that. And if the business says we accept that risk, we need to do it for operations reasons, or we don't have the budget, your job's done. Like you've told them what the risks are. It's the business's prerogative to, either mitigate the risk or just accept it and get on with its day. So I think too many cybersecurity people, unfortunately, they feel they're a bit like the gatekeepers. It's like, no, you have to do it securely or you're never going to do it. And like I said, fortunately, that's changing. And I really like seeing that cybersecurity is actually an enabler. You can get some, with the cybersecurity budget, there has been times where I've been able to use that to upgrade a PLC, for example, or put in some extra connectivity, say, again, risk, obsolescence. And it's made the engineers' life easier because they've got modern PLC. They don't have to drive down to, like 300 Ks, for like 8-hour drive, because now they have like a Starlink connection. And so they can remote in and do what they need to do. So cybersecurity can actually work out quite well in their favor. But it's just one of those things where it's really unfortunate when you see people just like hammering down it must be secure sort of mantra.
It sounds great to be secure, because I'm sure Phil's the same as me, and you probably too, Gavin. You've walked into facilities. It's like Fort Knox getting into the place, and then you walk into the controls platform, and it's sticky. There's yellow sticky notes with passwords and usernames. It's I'm sure it's improved, but that maybe the technology that you mentioned, the older legacy of products or equipment sitting at the factory floor isn't smart enough to connect into the authentication processes or the security processes. How are you seeing that? Are you seeing that getting better? Are you seeing that evolving? Are you seeing that improved, or is it even necessary?
Well, yeah. So let's just say you've got the post-it note next to the smart switch or smart sensor you need to log into, and it doesn't have secure protocols, or let's just say that it does for you to authenticate. But you have to take the plant day down or do a plant turnaround in order for you to enable them. Well, that could be 7 years away. So what do? You can't turn on the secure authentication because you don't have permission. You've got the post-it note there. Well, there are ways you can get around that. Like there are change control requirements. There's password databases you can get for free. You don't always have to go for a paid service, but you just have to look at it and go, look, this ain't perfect, but this is our best effort, and we're trying to make it work. There's always something that can be done to definitely increase that. Even hypothetically, control room, CCTV above the control room so people can watch. Well, they need to be able to log in and to monitor things, right? Well, half the time there's a username and password with like a white labeler on the bottom of the TV. So it's a matter of just covering that username and password up. And when the operator needs it, he can just walk up and then have a look and go, okay, cool, and sit back down. I'm sure they'll complain about it anyway, having to make that extra step up and look. But, like I said, best effort to try and bring that security level up a bit. There's always something you can do.
It's a funny thing because we sometimes think of cybersecurity, best practices as being, technology based, when actually it's a lot of behavioral type people problems, right? And actually just, using best practices just in your day-to-day life can secure your own personal data. I mean, we're always looking to kind of do that for ourselves. We're just kind of applying it to that enterprise or that business type scenario. We're using password lockers, as you mentioned. We're using secure passwords. We're not using the same password for everything that we do, right? We're using various different generators that are available, and these things are generally free as well. I guess, is there any risks around that? There probably is.
Well, that's the thing. There's always a trade-off. Like let's say we put in a complicated technology user authentication process. Well, what happens if that goes down? Or gets locked out? It's just trade-offs. that's what risk is. You're trading off one for another. You're reducing the risk here, but you could be patching no T. Again, you take a risk-based approach. You're going to have, if you're doing a patch, you're probably going to have to shut it down. So is it worth bringing operations down? Half the time, that's a no. So, trade-offs. So you're now exposed to this vulnerability because you haven't patched, but it's far better to keep the operations running. And that's all it is. Realistically, once you do this for a while, you get used to just like, well, there's a risk there. Is it perfect? No, but we just, we go about our day. It's logged. So one of the things that I want to bring up just quickly before I forget is that there's a project called PLC Security, Top 20. And it doesn't matter, again, if it's a PLC or a DCS or a controller or a smart device. Like, a lot of the information in there is actually quite good. And it's the top 20 controls to secure a PLC. I believe the hyperlink is plc-security.com. And, from a security perspective, if you think about it, ultimately you're trying to protect the process, and the PLC is controlling the process. So if you wanted to do something to secure yourself, that I'd recommend you go read that free resource. It's a pretty good one, and too few people know about it. I don't know. Did you guys know about PLC Top 20 security controls? Yep. Yeah.
No idea. What a good segue, because I was going to ask you this, Gavin, as well. One of the things that Phil and I always ask our guests, because Phil and I, we're on a learning adventure and a learning journey, and obviously you're in your space, you're on the same thing. You're really focused. You're learning in a certain area. So, what are the key things you're going to be learning over the next 12 months in your space?
I'm continuing my journey in understanding PKI, which is public key infrastructure, encryption, basically. Encryption is an interesting one in OT because it's that classic double-edged sword where you have, if you enable it, you could actually end up DOSing yourself, denial of service. So it's a very complex thing to understand, but I'll probably be learning 802.1AR specifically, and I'm sure everybody knows exactly what that is right off the top of their head.
Is that another Wi-Fi standard? What is that one? It sounds like a Wi-Fi standard.
It does. It does sound like a Wi-Fi. Unfortunately, it's if you're into IoT or even OT, it is basically how do you get certificates on these smart devices, and the certificate. The benefit of it is it authenticates. It's a way of saying, hey, this is who I am. Am I allowed to connect to your network? And you would pre-configure it to say yes or no, or, and then after that process is done, it will continually automatically updating its certificate and getting that process through. So learning that, I think, is probably, or continuing to learn is something I want to actually do on the lab. And it keeps coming up as a security control that you might want to implement, but it's a very, very complex control. And I feel like this is the thing that's going to help us get to like zero trust and having devices themselves authenticate, which will definitely help lower your risk in the long run.
There are more manufacturers out there giving those kinds of firewalls embedded into PLCs where they can do self-signed certificates as well, and utilize third-party authenticators as well through those processes. Yeah, so it's definitely going to be a critical piece of the puzzle as we start building these more secure networks. Most definitely.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the big question, if you have, say, a PLC with 802.1AR enabled and configured, who's going to be looking after it? Because realistically, it's the OT engineer. Okay, well, how are we going to teach them about PKI? And that's sort of standard. So, yeah, big questions. It's why it's an advanced security control.
And the infrastructure in place to manage all that as well, all the networking and the infrastructure, the topology. Yeah, that's a lot of learning there for the future industrial or OT specialist.
Yeah, and it's like most things. Everybody's sort of, the features are just coming thick and fast. As you said, firewalls on PLCs. Well, again, people have to learn how to maintain those and implement those. And Even when we're getting some benefits with no code, low code PLCs, that the more you've got more job and responsibilities, tasks that you need to perform as an automation engineer. And unfortunately, I think it's just going to keep on more and more stuff just going to get piled onto you to maintain this. So yes, it's going to be an interesting journey.
I guess just on a last topic that's come into my head, really, we talked about, AI and ML and LLMs and all these types of, I guess, newer technologies or technologies that are becoming more mature. I guess, how are they affected by cybersecurity? Is it, as we start integrating with these analytical platforms, is it, what are the impacts of these new technologies?
Well, if you can think of it like whether it's AI, LLM, machine learning, if you give it bad data, you get bad data out, bad results, bad information. Cybersecurity, if you manipulate that data so it's false, well then that's same result. From a cybersecurity AI, machine learning, protecting an environment, one of the ideal things you can do to protect an OT is baseline. And what that means is, you've got a temperature that's say like 55 degrees Celsius, it goes down to 50, it goes up to 60. So all of a sudden you've gone down to 20 degrees Celsius. You're outside of your baseline. So that has picked up an anomaly in your process. And again, you're trying to protect the process realistically in an OT or, IIoT environment. So I think AI, collecting that information, storing it, and then analyzing it from, what is my process supposed to be doing? That's going to come in. And a lot of people probably already twigged and gone, well, that sounds like a digital twin. And it's like, yeah, it kind of does. And, I don't like that marketing term, but realistically, that's where we're going to go, I think, is using AI to baseline our process so we can see if somebody's actually manipulating it in a hazardous way. So my crystal ball, if you will.
Absolutely. Look, Gavin, thank you for joining us today. Your insights have been pretty good, pretty interesting. Like I've learned so much about cybersecurity today, and it's kind of got me really excited to kind of get a bit more understanding. So I'll be definitely checking out that link that you threw back, and we'll have it definitely in the show notes for everyone else to be able to see that. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks again, Gavin. Same with me. You really opened my eyes, and I think what you made it to me, you made it almost reachable because you've explained it in a way that okay, yep, I can see that, and yeah. So thanks very much for sharing your knowledge and information. Obviously, clearly that's going to help me, and I'm with you, Phil. I'll have to listen to this podcast again actually to pick up more of those nuances. So thank you, Gavin, and we wish you all the best in your journey, and I'm sure people will be able to reach out to you. We'll have all those links in the notes as well, so they can. I'm sure you're available to ask questions and be on LinkedIn and so forth going forward.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Gavin.
Thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. And don't forget to subscribe to Unplugged, an IoT podcast, for more episodes with industry leaders and innovators, just like Gavin. Thanks for tuning in.